Hello, I'm Sarah, the Windy City Baker, and today's video is the fourth chapter in this series on pound cake. In this video, we'll be comparing different ingredient substitutions and their effect on the appearance, texture, and flavor of a basic pound cake recipe. Stay tuned for the results and join me as we journey down the baking rabbit hole. Pound cake is the quintessential basic butter cake, but no one wants to eat a dry cake or one that's super dense without any tenderness. The question is, which of these ingredients produces a moist cake with a dense yet tender crumb? Let's start by going through the ingredients that we're going to test. Butter is the fat that's present in the original pound cake recipe, so it'll serve as the control in our experiment today. This ingredient is a baking powerhouse. Not only does butter add flavor and richness, but it also helps with leavening. This means that it helps the cake naturally rise when it's been creamed with the sugar. Now, we're going to go more in depth on the creaming method in the next video in this series, so if you'd like to learn more, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you can be notified when that video comes out. That being said, because of the way butter is incorporated into cake batter, it also helps to create a light and tender cake texture that's moist. Vegetable oil is primarily used in baking to make your product moist. It also traps the gases released by chemical leavening agents like baking soda and baking powder, which helps make a tender and fluffy texture. Another benefit of vegetable oil is that it remains a liquid at room temperature, unlike butter, which becomes a solid. This often helps cakes feel moist, especially if the cake is put into the fridge. Sour cream is heavy cream that's been soured and thickened with lactic acid bacteria. It has a distinctive tangy flavor, and it also helps to make moist, rich, and tender cakes. While yogurt doesn't have that much fat in it, the acidity from the yogurt reacts with baking soda to cause leavening. Now, we don't have baking soda in our recipe today, so we won't really need the acid to activate the ingredient, but it should provide moistness to the cake. Greek yogurt is frequently touted as a healthier alternative with fewer calories than other common ingredients, like all of the ones that we have on our list. But yogurt also brings this tangy flavor to the final product. Cream cheese is a soft and spreadable cheese with a slightly tangy flavor. The fat in cream cheese helps increase moisture in the cake. This is an unconventional ingredient to use, but there are some cake recipes that have been made with ice cream, so I wanted to compare it to see how it changes the recipe. Ice cream also contains many of the ingredients already in our pound cake recipe. Might be interesting. Now let's talk about the base recipe for this experiment. I'm going to make Tish Boyle's Plainly Perfect Pound Cake recipe from the cake book. I absolutely love her cake recipes, and I've used her cookbook so many times that my copy is literally falling apart. If you'd like to get your own copy, I'll put a link in the description box below. Now, the only ingredient that I'm going to change in this recipe is the butter. For the control, I'll use the full amount of butter. For each test, with the exception of oil, I'll use half of the butter she originally calls for and instead substitute an equal amount in weight for each of the test ingredients that have a 1-to-1 substitution ratio. For the vegetable oil, the typical substitution ratio is actually 1 to 3/4, so I'll modify the weight accordingly for that one as well. By keeping half the butter in the recipe, we should still be able to get the leavening that occurs from creaming the butter and the sugar together, but also compare the effects of the test ingredients. Okay, so we have been baking all day, and here are our 6 finished cakes, completely cooled and with a slice cut out of each one. So we have our butter, oil, sour cream, yogurt, cream cheese, and vanilla ice cream cakes. Now, on first glance, there's obviously a wide range of colors and kind of textures that we're seeing in each of these cakes. I'm going to go through each in detail and sort of give my thoughts and opinions on their appearance, the texture, and also the flavor. Okay, so let's start. I think I'm going to jump into butter first. Let's talk about the cake to begin with. So the color on the outside of the cake is a little bit speckled, but for the most part, it's a really nice, deep, dark brown. It also has hardened the outside crust, so you have sort of this nice kind of hard exterior with then a soft interior. Okay, let's look a little bit here at the crumb of the cake. So with all of our pound cakes, what we're going to see with the texture is that they're all going to be dense. Okay, pound cake is not one of those cakes that has huge air bubbles in it. It's going to be a really kind of tight texture, but What you want in a pound cake, and what makes a really good pound cake, is that there's some airiness, some tenderness when you're eating it. So you don't want it to be like you're eating you know, something that's really kind of gooey or almost fudgy in kind of texture. You do want there to be some lightness in the crumb. So when we look at the slice of cake, you can see that there are a few little air bubbles that are kind of easy to see, but when you look up close, there are lots of itty bitty air bubbles. So that's kind of what we're looking for when we're talking about the crumb. Our butter cake is the control that we are using across this entire experiment. So as I go through the line, I'm going to come back and compare each to the butter just so that we have that comparison to sort of look at. This is our oil cake. Now looking at the outside, we see a couple of light spots. I'm not 100% sure where those light spots came from, since the majority of the cake, the color on the cake, is that golden brown, similar to the butter, although it's a little bit less speckled as we're looking at the cake. It also is a little more shiny. Bring these here to compare. A little less shiny than the butter one as well. Similarly to the butter cake, it does have sort of that hard crust on the outside, and the inside is soft and moist. On the inside, the crumb is, again, fairly tight, similar to butter, but we actually see a little bit more kind of flaking with the crumb, which indicates that it's a little bit more tender than the butter. On to our next one, which is sour cream. Looking at the outside of our sour cream cake, we have a lot of different browns happening. I'm not 100% sure what happened to give this color. I used a baking spray with all of these cakes to help the cakes release when we were baking. And I'm thinking maybe I got a little overzealous when I was spraying this one and it led to some of this color. However, I don't think that it was due to the baking, because when I was baking, or when I was checking it with the toothpick came out clean. So I didn't want to bake it any longer, because then it would have dried it out. And I obviously didn't know what it looked like since I hadn't taken it out of the pan yet. So we do have some different color variations, which could be due to the sour cream. The outside, similarly to the butter and the oil, has that sort of hard crust, and this inside is soft as well. Now, one thing when we look at the close-up here of the crumb, you'll notice a couple of things. The crumb is more dense, so there are fewer bubbles in the sour cream than in the butter. We also see some tunneling, which sort of means that air has been trapped in the cake, and as it's trying to get out, it sort of worms its way through the cake batter, and that's where you get these kind of air pockets. Another thing that I noticed, if you touch the inside, your finger kind of comes away with a little bit of moisture. That wasn't really the case when we were touching the butter. The oil one does have a little bit of oil that comes off on your fingers, but the sour cream then has that moisture as well. So now let's move on to the yogurt. So this one has a more even color, with the exception of these ridges, for the exterior of the cake. The golden brown color is really beautiful. Again, that hard crust with a soft interior. We do see a little bit of the tunneling again in this cake, and similarly to the sour cream, we have a very dense texture. The bubbles are very tight, and there's not as much air incorporated into that slice. For our next cake, which is cream cheese, this cake had the most even color across all of our cakes. So it was golden brown all the way around. It has the nice hard exterior, and then a very soft interior as well. One thing that you'll notice that we haven't seen too much yet in these cakes is that the crumb is very, very tender. So you see it's almost crumbling, and you can see sort of how the crumb has changed a little bit when it was cut. So This is telling me that we have a lighter crumb in this one than we've seen so far in our cakes. And last but not least, we have our ice cream, our vanilla ice cream pound cake. It, similarly to the cream cheese, has a very nice color around the majority of the cake. Nice golden brown, has a hard exterior, and the inside is actually very moist. It also has a very tender crumb where the texture of the slice is almost crumbling. So this looks much lighter than some of the previous ones that we've looked at. What I will say about this cake as well is that it does seem to have, there's a shine on it. So likely there is a fair amount of grease in this cake and oil, which is sort of giving that slick, shiny appearance. Let's start tasting some of our cakes. Let's start with butter. First thing that I taste is the citrus that we added, which is absolutely delicious. Then I have sort of the richness from the butter that comes in and just sort of an overall sweetness. Now, this recipe that we made, it's a plain pound cake. So there's not going to be a ton of flavor that's coming besides the citrus that we added in. So that's really good. The crust on the outside as well is, it's caramelized really nicely. So it gives an extra sort of sugary flavor, sort of a caramel flavor, and a crunch when you eat that too. So there's nice textural contrast between the outside and the inside. Now, one thing that I notice as I'm eating, this definitely has sort of that dense texture, that dense crumb that we were talking about before, but it's not like a gluey texture or anything that is kind of unappealing. So this is a really nice example of pound cake. Okay, let's move on to our next one, which is oil. So with this one, interesting. So with this one, I got a little bit of the citrus right at the very beginning, but then I felt like my palate was coated in oil, and that was sort of the flavor that ended as I was eating it. The other thing that I'm noticing as I'm eating this as well is that the outside isn't just, it's not just like a firm kind of a crust like we had with the butter. It's actually crispy. Like it almost feels like it was fried. So the texture is different than it is with the butter. Now, the texture is very moist. So the interior here is a moist crumb, but I think in terms of the flavor of the butter I liked more. And it wasn't, so I'm still tasting the oil from this one. And I have to say, I'm not a big fan of the way that the aftertaste is for this cake. So I'm gonna put this one back. That one's not my favorite. Let's try, actually, I'm gonna take a sip of water before we move on to the next one. Let's try our sour cream cake next. Looking at the texture when we just see the slice, I'm anticipating that this cake is going to be way more dense than either of the other two that we've tried so far. So you can definitely taste the citrus more than I feel like you could with the oil. But it is so dense, and as I'm eating, it's like almost gluing my mouth shut. It's very like dry. This mouth feel that you get when you're eating this, it's very, very dry. The flavor itself is a nice flavor. And again, that crust on the outside, it's a really nice crust. It's not like crispy like we had with the oil. But the actual denseness of that crumb is just not pleasant when you're eating it. And I don't actually think that there's a noticeable difference in the flavor with the sour cream added in comparison to the butter. Personally, I would not choose this particular option when I'm eating a pound cake. Let's move on to yogurt. Okay, that one just took me on a journey. There was a lot that sort of happened in eating that one little bite. So to start with, I tasted the citrus, just like I pretty much have with all of these. That was the first flavor that, that I had. Then it, similarly to the sour cream, although I feel a little less so, this one was very, very drying. This one, it definitely is dense, and it is a little bit harder to eat in terms of kind of the moisture level in your mouth. It almost sucks the moisture out. But it wasn't quite the same as sour cream. So that was a little bit better. But it also then had, I don't know what the flavor was. I'm gonna say weird. I don't have anything much more descriptive than that. There was a flavor in the middle that was a little bit odd, and I can't quite place it. And then it ended again with a little hit of citrus. So there was a lot that was going on in that little bite. It is a very, very dense cake. And honestly, if you are just, if you're just sort of touching and comparing with your finger for all of these, it is probably the driest out of all of the cakes. This one I also wouldn't choose. It does have a nice tasting crust. Again, not crispy like oil, more closely resembling the butter, but the interior is just, it's too dense and dry as well. Now let's try the cream cheese slice. Oh boy. Okay, this one is really good. It has a really nice crumb. It's so tender. The actual texture of it is like almost falling apart and melt in your mouth. The flavor is so good. The like citrus in it feels a little more intense or strong in flavor than some of the other ones that we had tried. Now I'm gonna compare, let me take another bite of this and compare it to the butter, because I wanna get a sense of whether I can taste the cream cheese in here. There's a definite flavor difference between the butter by itself and the butter plus cream cheese. This adds kind of another level to the richness. There's definitely kind of a slight tang to it. It's a subtle difference, but it's there. I feel like the cream cheese in this case really sort of balances the citrus and kind of helps the citrus flavors to shine, as opposed to some of the other flavors that we had, which kind of blunted it, or like the oil, where it really wasn't a very intense flavor, or the sour cream and the yogurt, where it kind of overpowered the citrus by the texture. So this one, it really complements the flavor. Okay, this one is really good. And our last cake is vanilla ice cream. So this was sort of the oddball, more of following, you know, TikTok trends and things online. But I wanted to try it. You know, ice cream has so many of the ingredients that you put into cake anyway, so I figured, what the hey, let's try it. Okay. Well, you definitely get a citrus flavor when you're eating this cake. That's the first flavor, that's sort of first and foremost what I'm getting. I personally like the texture. I think that the cream cheese cake has some more kind of structure to it. This is a very kind of light and tender cake, more so than really any of the ones that we've tried. So it's a little less pound cakey in that sense. You do get that citrus flavor, but I feel like right after the first hit, it kind of mellows out as you're eating the slice. Honestly, if I were to put these in order of what I would eat, let's see. First would be cream cheese. So cream cheese is number one. Then I think I would do butter And probably third, which surprises me, is the vanilla ice cream. It tasted really good and it had a nice texture. Oil, I think, would probably be fourth. And then yogurt and sour cream would be the last in terms of our experiment today. Well, there you have it. Butter plus cream cheese makes the best tasting cake that's moist and has a dense yet tender crumb. As always, if you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss any new videos. Join me in the next chapter when I'll be taking all of the information we've learned so far to make our own custom flavored pound cake recipe from scratch. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you the next time we journey down the baking rabbit hole. Until then, I've got a date with some pound cakes.